Yeah, it's a nice system. You tell us about electronic voting.
Hey, Mr. Hart, how are you?
Well, the main thing is the same. Everybody can hear, each console has its own speaker and it adjusts the volume independently on each one. So, I always submit
Well, sir,
Good morning, sir. Good morning. Right, good. Jason, I'm sorry.
yeah, Ian's been kind of pinch hit for me a little bit these last couple of days. Doing all right. Doing all right. Yeah.
I'm like a new job.
Andrew Simon, I think she used to be. She's at least out of town. I don't know.
You know, Hartsville,
At least he can say that.
I bet you live really close.
But no, we decided because the housing costs, building costs are so high right now, we're gonna wait until South graduates from high school to really evaluate it.
I can see that. You
That's
know,
just we look.
I mean, if you quit looking for something to pop up.
We were looking hard, the sheriff was giving, he'd send me a link to something, we're like, hey, this one's might be, for sale. We decided just that we're gonna go and see others. Just like, well, how's the market goes on there or whatever else.
I got a house with this car.
It ain't 100,000 renovations. I did myself.
I can't say anything. Except for cheap.
My RV is nicer than my house.
Mine is too, a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, it's in the driveway, very green, but I have to. It's like a leisure travel van up in Canada. All the week was the city, all the social activities. Basically. We want more for research, for classes, for the I had one of my buddies on Chattanooga, coming back to we got some reservations of it, and he has a big vehicle, they come to there and hang the tree. He's not, go back home, I can't get this thing in there.
I've got a pull through Gulf Shore liquor day. We're going down there for a week. We go down there quite a lot. I go to the state court. You're right, you have to get bigger than that. Good look. I don't know what power that is.
Well, we got condo and all days, around water.
You put a 22-foot truck on that, plus that, now you're long.
This is for the county commission, there's not people coming here now.
I mean, the whole thing falls.
We'll come to the house and we'll replace it. Without even asking, they like, 4 years ago, I read the word.
And that's what they all make so far. 3 years ago, 3 years ago.
Here, there, I did it. I did the list. One more.
Yeah, I love my body.
All three of these first 10
years ago.
We got on that deal Saturday.
After about the third day, you kind of get
But I got.
You want us to sit up here?
We tried.
Well, if you could, if everyone could sit somewhere there's a microphone, because I've got some people who's not gonna be able to attend, and I told them we'd record it.
Think we got anybody else come?
Somebody should be here in Judge Kane's office.
Very,
I'll be lying Taylor.
I've been twice this week.
You get to be right here. That's scary.
At least I get called. Wait a couple more minutes and get it started.
All the people over here, it's not too bad. not too bad. I'm afraid it'd be really warm, but not too bad.
Well, we had it, we charged the prison Monday.
If they not found the leak,
They found it, they just can't repair it. His suggestion yesterday was complete system replacement. So he recommended we go out to elementary school and see what they did with those split Mitsubishi units. He recommended doing that. So I sent Clint an email this morning, him and David Cotton, see if we can go out there and look at it, and a clip and a copy of that RFP where they sent that out to see how they worded it. We're gonna do the same thing here.
I'm not sure how that would work. Not saying it won't, but not sure how.
We're trying to word the RFP as general as possible and let people submit proposals. Not just for the system themselves, but also if they have different funding proposals, they can do that as well.
I got a nephew that's an engineer, that's what he does. He designs systems for big buildings all over. He's actually in Germany right now, looking at some new equipment that they've sent him over there to train on, investigate. But it gets back to like what his thoughts on the latest type systems will be. Might be a good excuse for him to come do. This is one of the big engineering firms in Nashville. We've used forms from the school stuff, but I cannot remember. Can't remember the name of the company. One of those with initials.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to respect everybody's time. If we could go ahead, if anybody can pick a spot with a microphone. We've got some people who are not going to be able to attend, and I've told them I was going to record it so they could view it later. And then I would ask you if you're going to speak or anything, if you look at the unit in front of you, you see something that looks like a space bar on the left side. That's where you'll need to touch before you speak, and then when you're done, touch it again to stop speaking. Okay, the reason we're here today is to go over the needs assessment that was prepared by Mr. Hart from CTAS. Everyone should have a copy of it, and if you don't, we've got some printed out here. Then after we do the needs assessment, Mr. Hart has sent me a template for a request for qualification for engineering services that the sheriff and I went over some information yesterday, and I've already started filling that out. So that would be the next step after today, is kind of put out the request for qualifications. So right now, just to go over the needs assessment, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hart.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First off, thanks for the opportunity to get to be part of this process and help you as you start down this road of looking for opportunities to address your jail needs. I'm just going to walk through this process of what I did and some of my findings and some of the positive things that I observed as I did this assessment. The one thing I want to stress, though, with this is that there is no crystal ball. So even though we give some basic projections in here, that can all change based on changes to laws, based on things such as COVID-19 that might occur, but I just wanted to stress that. Back in November, I was asked to start this process, to talk about it, and actually started coming on site back in February to start evaluating the jail needs and taking a look at the population projections. TCI, the executive director, Will Wall, and the deputy director, Bob Bass, had already done a physical plan assessment. And I think that the conclusion was that the physical plan is sort of at its life expectancy as it is right now. And therefore, as part of my needs assessment, I did not duplicate the efforts or the work that they had already accomplished, and left it at that. One of the things that came up early on, a discussion that we had, and I'm on page 5 of my assessment here. One of the things that came up early is that there was some discussion that there were inmates that the current facility, or that the leadership felt that they couldn't house due to their level of security needs or the potential security risk. So we drilled down into that a little bit, and we only found a handful of folks that were housed elsewhere over a period of several months, or about a year, I guess it was. So I didn't really find that the numbers were significant. There are examples, and I'll use one just east of here, where we found an average of about 70 inmates being housed in other facilities simply because they couldn't house them. We looked at another county that where they can't house any female inmates, so all those female inmates are distributed in counties in various areas. But I just didn't see a whole lot of inmates housed outside the county, so it didn't really impact my population projections that we'll get to in a little bit. Turning over to page 6, the current challenges obviously is an aging physical plant. The population, while not routinely exceeding the capacity, but it is increasing. And then certainly the numbers indicate that your community is growing. And I think we're all anxiously awaiting late September, early October, when the census data finally comes out to really get a clear picture of just what we're looking at. Some other challenges are lack of housing to adequately house the type of inmates that we have in our facilities. You know, when this facility was built and expanded, I think that the dormitory type style or spaces were probably adequate for the type of inmates that we had in custody. However, we don't see those low risk, low level inmates in custody anymore. They're typically diverted out of custody. They're typically, minimal sentences that are out. And what we see in our jails are more high risk, more challenging population. And so that dormitory style space just doesn't always work to put large numbers of people with various problems in one unit there. Another problem is that there's only a handful of cells to isolate or segregate those inmates with that are extremely violent, sex offenders, those that have some medical or mental health issues. There's very few cells to house those kinds of folks there. In fact, in 2 of the cells that are used for those higher risk kind of persons to be housed, one of them has no shower, so we have to move inmates out of a cell with a shower so we can shower the other. So it's a constant juggling of the population. I'm going to refer to two numbers here throughout this study, and one of them is what your actual capacity is, and the other one is what I'll refer to as sort of a classification capacity. And there are figures that are used between 80% and 90%. I've used 85%, but when your jail, the average daily population exceeds that 85% of the capacity, it's full, it's crowded. It doesn't enable you to adequately separate people by risk and need. And just because I say 85% for the entire facility, we really, and I'll show that here in a few minutes, we really need to break that down for both men and for women, because they both have medical issues, mental health issues, serious charges, predators, those that are easily preyed upon, elderly versus younger folks. So we have to have adequate housing levels to be able to separate those folks by their individual risk and need. As you can see by figure 1 there on page 6, there's a red line that shows what your capacity is, and then a green line sort of shows that 85% capacity, or that crowding, or that classification figure I was referring to. And your jail, the blue line, the jagged blue line, clearly shows that you're routinely exceeding that 85% capacity. Now you do, and that's an average, you do routinely exceed the full capacity, but of concern is that the challenges that are impacted with trying to separate offenders by the risk of need. One thing that I found very interesting in this county that we see in larger counties that are not in place sometimes is there is a strain in the working relationships between the courts and the sheriff's office or the jail in trying to keep people moving through the system or trying to address when there's some crowding. I found a very positive relationship that's going on here that sometimes I just don't see, and the result sometimes becomes a significant increase or surge in the inmate population backed up because of that lack of working together. And I just didn't see that here. I found it very positive. The other thing that was very positive that I saw is your magistrate process, or your judicial commissioner process. That we see the preset bond schedules in some counties. We see some where the magistrate's only available 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. We see some where the magistrate never will interact with an inmate that's been brought into custody. Clearly not the case here. Every arrest, every person that is brought to jail, they see face to face with the magistrate. And the magistrate then evaluates the setting of that bond based on that interaction with law enforcement and the interaction with the inmate as it should be. So very positive things in doing the right thing that what I observed here going through this. I do comment here that there was no form of pretrial risk assessment conducted. That is something that we'll see in typically larger counties where there's an assessment that is conducted that will determine the likelihood of that person reoffending if they get out of custody, or the likelihood of that person showing up for court if they're diverted out of custody. And that may be something that is considered as you start moving along into this new facility planning.
Does that assessment, the magistrate?
I have seen it done by actually the booking staff, and it's turned over to the magistrate. I've seen it done by magistrates. I've seen it done in Knox County, the actual Sessions Court judge will do it as well. They do it at two different times. So it varies based on how you want to establish that. I talked about a criminal justice coordinating committee, and you have this committee established, and I know you have your court security committee. One of the things that I think is helpful as counties start growing and we start looking at the system is having an opportunity to bring the system together on a regular basis and to look at the system, evaluate what changes that you've initiated in the county, thinking about how decisions made by one entity impact or have a ripple effect amongst others. And we've just found that, and Bob Bass and I have done a lot of work with the CCP programs and others, such as the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, but it brings the stakeholders together on a regular basis just to look at what are the trends, what's going on, what can we do to improve, or what can we do to sort of continue the path that we're headed on some of the positive changes that are out there. One of the things that I see frequently in some counties, and this is another positive, but one of the things I see frequently in some counties is when a person comes into custody and they're determined to be indigent. They'll finally get into the courtroom and the decision or the determination of indigency will be made, and then they'll be set off for a period of time until they have an opportunity to meet with the public defender and then get rescheduled to get back in court to address their case. And sometimes that takes a period of time. It delays it. The sense that I got here talking to the jail administrator, talking to the sheriff is that the process that's in place here seems to work quite well and doesn't seem to impact any kind of those types of delays that we have seen in other areas. Again, another positive thing that you're trying to do to address the process of keeping people moving through the system. Just talk briefly about the misdemeanor state probation. And one thing that we have to sort of keep in mind is that we have a population of people in the community that are on probation. So, you know, it's not just those that are in custody behind bars, but there are also those that are in custody, but they're on some form of supervised or some level of supervised probation in your local community. We talked about, the sheriff and I had discussed the need for a criminal justice center, and as you know, I didn't evaluate the courts because that's not my area of expertise. But we talked about the challenges as it relates to the current court annex. Inmates from the prison will sit in the parking lot in vans waiting to get into the courtroom. One day I was, one of the visits here, there was an actual defendant that was brought in through the open parking lot that had been charged with murder. So the risk to safety or security in the public in that open parking lot sometimes can be problematic. We can look to Roane County for a significant incident that occurred several years ago where the jail staff are moving people through an open parking lot and how they were ambushed. The other concern I had, and I had a moment to take a look at the court holding cells that are in that annex. While they're really nice, however, there is a significant blind spot where the bathroom area is there, which for persons that are going to court, coming from court, being taken in custody in the courtroom, sometimes their emotional status is not good, and it just, to me, just seemed to offer a significant blind spot over in that particular area. Moving over to page 8, I talked about the lack of programming space. Typically the programming that's available, the volunteers that come in, is they stand in the hallways and basically speak through the gates to the inmate population. You have great medical coverage. You have a nurse on site 40 hours a week, the physician's on site a couple times a week, and again, another positive thing that sometimes we just don't see in some of the small rural communities out there. I gave a description about the jail. The initial facility was constructed in 1956. 1992, an addition was made. But again, the type of housing, I think, doesn't necessarily support the type of inmates that you have at this point in time. The other part of the problem you have is the small outside recreation area. You have a tree in the recreation yard, which there's been at least one escape that was brought to my attention, and then the deterioration of that bank there due to river flooding is problematic. You do have technology now for visitation that can be done via tablet or a kiosk, which is another positive there. The way that the jail is sort of designed at this point in time, you have a capacity for 6 female inmates and 38 male inmates for a total capacity of 44. And if you look down at table 2 on page 8, you see what the total average daily population has been from 2011 through early May of 2021. And you can see that the average daily population annually does not exceed your capacity. However, there are days throughout those periods of time where the capacity was exceeded. But what I do point to is that 85% of that classification factor has been right at or routinely exceeded over those periods of years. Over on page 9, one of the discussions that we've had is that the thought of continuing to operate the current jail as a workhouse, work release kind of operation should you decide to move forward on a new facility. And I mean, certainly the facility has been well maintained over the years. The thing that I would suggest that you have some discussions on is that if you make that decision, you need to consider what the operational costs are going to be, because it is going to require people. It is going to require movement of food services, those support kind of things back and forth from the jail to there. But I think that the biggest impact will be staffing and operating two buildings. And where you might be able to consider taking a look at getting creative with the design of the new facility that supports a separate egress for work release or work kind of things where you can create for some separation of your population to minimize the exposure or trafficking of contraband throughout the facility. But that's something I think that you need to discuss and just evaluate the risk or the cost of operating two separate facilities. One of the things that I take a look at on the bottom on table 3 is I'll take a look at different snapshots, different times of how many inmates that you had in different cells within your facility. And again, your population doesn't routinely exceed the capacity, so I didn't really have anything that stood out or jumped out there. I will tell you, in some of these needs assessments, we will see a capacity of, say, 10 inmates for a housing unit, and we'll see 30, where it's significant, and it just wasn't significant here. I'm certain you're familiar with your jail operating budget on page 10, so I'll skip over that. On top of page 11, you have 22 positions for the jail that currently operate your facility. One of the things that I might point to now is what we encourage, that if you start the process of new jail design, start moving down that road, I would encourage you to have a staffing analysis done of your existing facility and your existing operation now, so we can capture all the transports out of the building. We can capture your relief factors. We can capture all those items now. And then as the design starts moving along, we can overlay that onto the new design. And what that does is enable you to start getting a feel for what is the operational cost going to be of this new facility. And then we can also take a look at what would the operational cost be of operating that second facility. And so you can start making decisions as you move forward. But I would encourage that sooner than later as you start moving down this process. Table 5 gives the average daily population by sex from 2011 through 2020. As expected in 2020, COVID significantly reduced the inmate population, not only here, but across the state and across the country. But on the over towards the left, you'll see the male capacity and the male 85% capacity. Your male population during those 10 years averaged about 30 or 37 in custody, and your capacity was 38 versus that 32, 85% capacity. And I think that number of 37 was again significantly impacted in 2020 by COVID-19. Moving over across the right, you'll see that the female average daily population was 6 in custody. You had a capacity of 6, and then you're at 85% classification factor is 5. Some agencies decide that, and over on page 12, decide to house or contract with other entities to house what I'll refer to as discretionary inmates. You do have a contract with the Department of Corrections. During this 10-year period of 2011 through early 2021, you had an average of about 39% of your population were state inmates in your facility. And that compares to about a little over 16% on a statewide average. And again, it's just an average. We're not talking about significant numbers. But one of the discussions that came up during this process is that what if we added some beds that we can house some additional state inmates in our facility? And I mean, certainly that is a discussion that you might have, or a decision that you could certainly make. But I've never advocated for building additional beds with the anticipation that we can house other people's inmates, whether they be state inmates or whether they be inmates from another county or federal inmates. What I would encourage you to consider is that you build for what your needs are, and what even when we get to my projections, and you may feel that my projections are fairly accurate, you may feel that, we need to add a little bit to that, that's fine. But should you decide to bring in additional inmates, if you've got the space, certainly that's fine. But to build with the anticipation of bringing other people's inmates in, I've never advocated for it. And, but that's certainly a discussion that the county could have. Moving over to page 13, you can just see that the charts, figure 2, just sort of shows the capacities based on that previous table that I had there. One of the things that is well, the jail first off is certified with the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and that's a requirement to contract with the Department of Corrections. Arrestees at booking are they're queried under veteran status, their homelessness status. One of the things that I think is lacking, or at least was communicated to me, is that the information regarding the veterans, there's really nothing done with that. And I don't know if you have a Veterans Affairs officer in this area, but that might be something to consider, is to link those persons or bring that Veterans Affairs officer in and sort of start those discussions and maybe identify that there's some potential benefits or some things that they can connect that person to in custody. The medical staff has a screening protocols in place for those that have been diagnosed with or identified as having potential mental illness, and they start moving them through the system there. One of the things I take a look at on table 7 is bookings and releases, particularly focused on bookings. I took a look at from 2011 through through 2020, and you can see that you had an average of 796, almost 800 bookings on an annual basis. Based on over on page 14, based on your citizen population, your community growth, and a booking rate that I calculated based on those citizen growth and bookings each year, we can give a basic projection of how many bookings that you can anticipate. And you can see out through 2041 that it looks like projected bookings could be somewhere at just a little bit over 1,100 bookings on an annual basis. Okay, that's compared to right at 800 right now. So one of the reasons that I give that figure is that as we start talking about designing a new facility, you want to ensure that booking, that release area will take that into consideration to support the bookings and releases that will be processed through that area. We did talk about the volume of people coming through from Core Civic, both inmates, staff members coming through the facility, and I've given some numbers here at the bottom of page 14. Another positive thing that I identified here, and is over on page 15. In some counties where they are in extreme crisis, in fact, I just did this similar briefing to a county last week that has some significant crowding, even coming out of COVID-19, they're still significantly crowded in their facility. But on figure 3, what I capture is on table 9 and figure 3 is I take a look at how much time a person spent in your jail when they were released from custody. And what I typically see is somewhere around 40 to 44% of inmates leaving jails have been spent less than 24 hours in custody. You can see 48% of your population, when they walk out the door, they've spent less than 24 hours. Positive thing with the courts, positive thing with your magistrate program, it's just the processing issue. Then you have another 32% that spend between 2 and 7 days. And again, that's right about what I typically see. This particular jail that I referred to last week, they averaged, I think it was 23% of their inmates were released in less than 24 hours, and it was about 25% that were released between that 2 and 7 days. Again, the population was extreme, it's because of that length of stay. So good things going on here to keep your population moving through your facility or through your system. Over on page 16, I just gave some data based on the annual reports out of the Tennessee Judiciary that reflected the number of cases or filings through criminal chancery, civil circuit court. Table 11, I pointed to pretrial judicial diversion. And it appears that there's a use of pretrial judicial diversion that is being used here. And again, I think that those are some further discussions as you start moving forward with new jail design to consider things such as diversion, things such as reentry, things such as programming, things such as work release programs. The TCI and I have been collaborating on some accreditation, on an accreditation process that counties can achieve one of two levels of accreditation that will enable an increase in reimbursement for housing state inmates. Well, that's positive, but another positive is that it supports the governor's criminal justice reform initiatives to start addressing the needs of people that are in custody and linking them back into our local communities to hopefully be successful. So those are things that I think that when you start looking at your design that you might want to have those discussions to consider how you're going to support that vision, those goals, if you will. Page 17, I could probably, the top three cases filed through fiscal years 2012 through 2019, I could probably copy that page and paste it on 94 other counties. Typically what I see throughout counties across the state, the impact of drugs on our criminal justice system and on our communities. Another area that I look at is table 13 on page 18 is the number of misdemeanor offenders in custody. And we're just talking very small numbers. And what I've done is a comparison from 2010 to early 2021 of both pretrial and sentence as compared to the statewide pretrial and sentence misdemeanors in custody. And you're higher than in the pretrial folks in custody, but again, those are very small numbers that we're looking at. I use an example of where I would have some concerns, and again, this is a county that I briefed last week. That left-hand column of pretrial inmates in custody was almost double that number, and their sentence inmates in custody ranged between 0 and 1 year after year after year. So what it told me is that it would take a period of time to get a person in court, and when they finally got in court, they were just getting time served, and we were able to validate that. So I don't really see anything of concern here that jumps out at me that I would encourage you to look at different practices or processes as it relates to that. Again, I heard nothing but positives in the relationship with the sheriff and the courts. Positive thing. Down at the bottom of page 18, I talk about some of the programs that you have in place, and again, they're very minimal. One of the things that the sheriff did stress is that he, in the design, or in the proposed design of the new facility, that there's adequate opportunity for programming and work of the inmate population. Page 19, table 14, one of the things that I'm asked frequently, particularly by county legislative bodies on these, is how do we sit with other counties that are similar in size to us? And so I started putting this table together in the last couple of years in some of these studies to sort of show the 4 or 5 counties smaller than us, and then the 4 or 5 counties larger than us, just larger than us. And you can see that table there. And one thing that jumps out at me is that extreme right-hand column is the incarceration rate, the number of people incarcerated in your community per 1,000 citizens. And you can see that you're probably you are right at the lowest of the 2.14 citizens incarcerated for every 1,000 as compared to other counties there. Your inmate count is similar, is towards the lower end of those, and your facility, looks like your facility is sort of has the third largest capacity compared to those counties in those areas. So I just show that to you just to sort of show what that comparison looks like of those larger and smaller communities. So now we start taking a look at the population projections, and over on table 15 on page 20, This first table just gives some population projections based on incarceration rate of your highest incarceration rate, your average incarceration rate over a period of several years. And it's connected to or multiplied by what your citizen population is. So it just gives me sort of a baseline to work from to start making some further projections. But I'll just go across, and you can see it, 2011, your county population was 7,966. There's 3,900 males, and your actual average daily population during 2011 was 35. And I just simply divided 3.962 into 35 and came up with an incarceration rate of 8.83. And then you can see that going across for your females. I took the average incarceration rate from 2011 through 2021 and came up with an 8.02. And then I just simply multiplied that for the males by your male population, and then I did the same thing of the 1.36 by your female population to come up with a population projection. And as you asked, sir, you asked me to give projections out 20 years, so I went out to 2041. And you can see that the projected population for your inmates in custody is 58 males and 7 females. Now that's just based on your community population. We're going to add to those numbers here in a second.
What did you use to get those county citizen population?
I went to the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Development, the UT website, to get those populations. Now, these are estimated numbers, and certainly these numbers are going to look a lot different come September, October. So over on page 21, I talk about a couple areas. The first thing I talk about is a peaking factor. So just for basic purposes, let's say that your average daily population is 50. However, there are days throughout a month that it may be 51, or maybe 55 in custody, or you might have a day where there's 60 in custody. So what I did was I took a look over a period from 2011 to 2020, and I took a look at the 3 highest counts in each month for each of those years, and came up with a class or a peaking factor to sort of show what that number looks like above what your average daily population is. So the average or the peaking factor for males came out to a 1.1022, and I'll show you that here in a second. And then for females, it's about 1.4. The other thing that we've talked about already is your classification factor of 85%. Your jail's full when that average daily population exceeds that 85%. And I'm going to add that here. Another thing that I talk about, and I do not include it into the population counts, but I just reflected is those inmates that we can anticipate to be in custody that have some serious medical issues, serious mental health issues, are extremely suicidal. And I think that it's important that we try to identify what those numbers might look like, because as we start talking about design of the facility, we want to ensure that you incorporate those considerations. And the other thing is a surge factor. I have been tracking, I think it's about 30 different counties with new construction or major renovation. And what we found is that those counties, on average, have surged almost 23%, 24% after opening a new facility within a few months. The population has grown by about 23 to 24%, and just sort of tracks at that level there. So I offer that figure here to add into this calculation. So let me bring this all together here on page 22. And I'll start with your female inmates. Your potential average, your base average daily forecast, you can see in 2021 is 4, and it goes out to 2041 of 7. And that connects back to page 20, where that is your population based on your community size only. For females, the population surge is about 2.57. There was no impact there, it came out to be a 0. And then your subtotal. Now your peaking factor, again, that is the figure that your average daily population was exceeded those 3 days each month for a period of about 10 years. And it ranged between a 2 and a 3 all the way out to 2041. And then your classification factor ranged between 1 and 2. And again, that classification factor is the ability to adequately separate offenders by risk and need. And then for females, that mental health capacity looks like it's about 1 person that we probably need some type of special housing for, if you will. So for females, the total bed capacity ranges between 7 and 12 females in custody by the year 2041. On table 17, I did the same projections, same different categories. You can see that the base average daily population is 58. Population surge is about approximately 12 males in custody by 2041. Peaking factor adds another 7, and classification factor adds a total of 12. So I'm estimating about 89 males in custody by the year 2041. And then down at the bottom table on 18, you can see the total capacity looks like it's right around 101 inmates that I would estimate that would be in custody. Now, if we go back to page 20 on table 15, and something that what I would suggest or what I would recommend is that come September or October, once the census is released, we can readjust. We can go back. I can take a quick look at this and readjust this and readjust that population projection if you so desire to see if it has a significant impact on what the population projections might be for the future. That would be something I would just sort of keep my eye on what we might do to assist you as you start moving forward in design. The other thing that I say here, going back to page 22, is that there's no crystal ball. Sometimes counties will feel that that number is right what they've had in their mind as a good projection. Sometimes counties will feel that the number is fairly low. I mentioned the county last week. They made a decision that they were going to add about 20 to my number. Another small county, but again, you know your county better than I do. You know the dynamics of your county is. But this is just the calculations to give you some projections of what I feel that are what your needs might be. Moving over to page 24, there's a publication called Building Community Support for New Jail Construction. It's published by the Department of Justice. And they point to 3 things of why counties or why jurisdictions build or expand jails. And they talk about that the existing facilities damaged, worn out, or no longer suitable for housing inmates. While you will maintain this facility, but aging is catching up, and it certainly is in a flood zone. Secondly, it talks about the existing jail no longer meets the needs of the jurisdiction. We've pointed out that your capacity frequently exceeds, that your population frequently exceeds capacity, certainly that classification figure, and then it's extremely difficult to separate offenders by their risk and need. And you can't operate the third point that that article or that publication points to is the building can't operate efficiently. Again, when you start thinking about the growth of the community, you start thinking about inmate classification, the ability to separate people by risk and needs, your current facility is it's limited now. It's not able to address that, certainly now, but in the future. On page 25, table 22, I've been asked this in the past too, is okay, Jim, what kind of beds do you think would would be beneficial? If you took that population, what kind of beds do you think would be efficient and be effective? So when we start down the path of designing a new facility, it gives us sort of a framework to work within. Now, the total number of beds I'm offering there is 105, and it's 4 above what I projected, but I did that just to avoid eliminating having just single housing units. But you can see the classification along the right-hand column where I talked about exterior work details, interior work details, special needs housing for folks, segregation housing, and then that minimum or medium custody types of housing to support the different types of people that you have in custody. And then jumping over to recommendations, again, I provided the mayor with a copy of an RFQ for architectural and engineering services to consider if that's the direction that you want to head to look at new jail planning. Talked about in that planning is to consider that all the support areas, it's not just about housing, to consider the support areas. The other thing I would also consider is that you think about the future. While we gave a projection of 101 inmates, 20 years out, do you want to build a new jail in 20 years, or do you want to have the flexibility that maybe you have another phase in 20 years that you can expand additional housing units? So based on that, you want to ensure your booking area, your storage areas, your food service areas, all those type of things would support that growth, should that be the decision that you want to head in the future. And again, I talked about a criminal justice coordinating committee, county corrections partnership, but a process where the stakeholders come together on a regular basis just to sort of look at our system, look at what you have locally, and are the things that you say that you put into place, are they working? Are they helping or hindering what you have going on? Then the remaining pages just give some of the data to sort of support everything that I've talked about there. That's it.
I have one question. It's going to be, and I just need to know how to answer it, because I'm sure I'm going to be asked it. On the tables on page 22, 3, 4, you're looking at 2021, and then you've got a huge spike to 2022. And all of your growth projections are fairly level from 2022 forward. What is accounting for that huge spike between 21 and 22?
What I did is I started basing those projections, eliminating the data from 2020 because it was so skewed off. And so I went basically from the data going up to 2019 to give those projections.
Do you understand my concern?
Yes, sir.
The other thing that I will comment, it looks like in looking at the historical, the great spike was in, over the last particularly 5 years, was in female populations. But yet we're not seeing that spike leveling it out. That seems counterintuitive to me for some reason. If they're growing that much over a 5-year period, it looks like they're going to continue to grow at a lot stronger rate than what we're showing them here. That concerns me a bit. I'm not questioning your projections, don't get me wrong. I think this is the thing that I'm going to be confronted with by the other commissioners. That's my biggest concern, is our capacity where we've routinely overextended ourselves in the female side. And can it be designed so that there are cells that can be, how to use the term, transferred from male population to female population easily? Is there gonna be a line of demarcation in the cell block that can move? Or does it have to be totally different cell block?
You're referring to flex housing?
Yes.
Where you can ensure that the commode shower ratios, those types of things enable the ability, and sight sound separation enable the ability where you can flex house, use it for male or female. And I think that through the design process, can be creative, and you can certainly do that.
So that could be incorporated in the design. I think that would alleviate a lot of concerns that we're going to see one part of it, and the other part of it's going to be fine if we have some flexibility within internally. Just a thought.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? I'll say the sheriff and I, as far as programming space, the sheriff and I have talked about that. That's something we would like to include because we were looking at putting in place programs to reduce recidivism. We looked at other communities. The one I've had more knowledge of is in Gibson County, and the program they put in place that saw the recidivism go from the program participants from 80% down to 6%. So they saw a significant drop there. And they also had basically a work release program. So the inmates went out, actually went to work for a company, got paid. Some of that money went to pay their housing costs, went off, paid back child support, any fines and fees and whatnot, went into a bank account if they had anything left. When they released at the end of it, they had money in the bank account, they had a job lined up, and then they had transitional housing they went into also. I think they transitional housing, they looked at it for a year, but I think they said the majority of people didn't even stay there a year. They went out to their own apartment, anything after that, and that accounted for a significant decrease in the recidivism rate. So that's things the sheriff and I have discussed, and we'd like to include in this facility. We did look at trying to renovate the current jail versus putting programming space and a work release space in a new facility. If you're going to use the new jail, if you're going to reuse the current jail, like Mr. Hart said, you're looking at staffing. What's that going to be there versus, keeping this facility open with staffing versus putting it in the new facility. Also, you're probably going to have to do some renovation on this building. There's significant areas that are, deficient, but they are, the plumbing and other areas in the current jail versus building it into the new jail. I personally would like to go ahead and just put it all in one new facility, and that way you've got everything located in one spot instead of having to divide up your staff between two different places. That's my personal thought, and I think the sheriff, I don't want to speak for him, but I think he's on board with that also. So that's kind of our thoughts in that area as far as going forward on the jail. And we did look at it. It was a request from the district attorney's office and public defenders and others to look at including court space in this as well, so we don't have to bring them from the facility down to the current CJC. I personally have experience going to Macon and Smith counties, especially Macon County, have more experience there. It was very, very secure. There were sometimes my clients didn't even leave the jail itself. I went back and spoke to them if there was an offer or something, or I had questions. I went back, was able to go through the secured doors to go speak to my client instead of them being brought out somewhere or maybe being held in the holding cell. That was very helpful, and it expedited quite a few cases. And so I think if we could have something like that in our new facility and then move some of our staff over there as well. I know the current CJC does not have enough room for storing their records and everything. They're actually stored currently inside the courthouse here. Try to include that space. A lot of places build, firewalls and everything around it, and it's very protective in those new spaces. I think looking at those facilities as well as the other ones Mr. Hart spoke into, make sure we've got a sufficient kitchen, storage, all that stuff. So if you expand in the future, you don't have to expand your kitchen or anything. It's already in place. You're just looking at expanding beds. So those are things we discussed, and we were trying to include that information in the RFQ as we go forward. So, and again, that was all based on speaking to Mr. Hart, looking at his report, speaking to the sheriff. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. So if there's anybody that's got any questions or suggestions or anything on that, whether right now is the time to discuss it because we're open to all ideas. We just want to make sure whatever facility we build, it meets and is sufficient for all the stakeholders and make sure it's going to meet our needs going forward as far as we can project out.
Where do we go from here? What's the next step?
The next step is we're working on the RFQ for the engineering services to come in and look at potential sites and also start designing the facility to the specifications that we've mentioned here. And then also, I think Mr. Hart mentioned, when they go back, look at my notes, the staffing analysis. I think that's something we also need to do. I would like to get started on that as soon as possible. So if Mr. Hart has got some suggestions about either he can do it or an outside group we need to go to, I think that's something we need to look at. And I think that'll also, we could use that staffing analysis to look at, do we maintain a workhouse at the old jail versus putting in the current, in the new facility, or is it better to combine them? So that would be, those two things I see going forward, working together.
Can we do the staffing analysis without having the design of the new building?
Yes, sir. That's what I would recommend, that what we do is a staffing analysis of the existing facility. So it captures how you operate here, but it also captures all the stuff that happens outside the building, because you're moving people in court, you're moving people to other counties, you're doing those things. The other thing that it will do is it will capture what I refer to as net annual work hours, build a relief factor. So we're able to do an apples to apples comparison from this facility to the new design, the operational concept. We can identify the post, what each post is going to represent in the number of people, and then be able to give you what that's going to cost as far as operating. So developing a staffing plan in the existing facility, we overlay it on the new facility, and we'll have a good estimate of the cost.
You're overlaying it based on your projected bed capacity?
Based on the design of the facility.
That's what I'm saying, but if you don't have the design of the facility, so you're going to just do the first part with existing. Once you have a design, then you come back and do.
Yes, sir. All we do now is once we get the new design, we just identify the posts, and we take the calculations from that to identify what each post is going to be. And the other part of the staffing analysis of the new plan will be, how are we going to operate? So we develop various scenarios to ensure that the staffing plan meets the needs of how to operate that building.
Any other questions or thoughts?
I will say I appreciate how thorough this is, and I know you've put a lot of hours into it. And certainly want to thank you for that, and not be remiss in thanking you and letting you know how much it is appreciated and how much useful information we have.
I will say that we will work with the county on every step of the process, whether it's through site selection, jail design. That's what Bob and I are leaving to do now, is for here in a minute, is to review jail plans. And we provide suggestions, ensure it meets standards. We'll help all along the way. There won't be any missteps. There's always missteps, but hopefully what we'll do is we'll prevent many of those through working with you guys, through your committee. We'll work with your architect, we'll work with your engineers, and we'll help with the planning stages of it. So you're not leaving anything out, or there's anything that comes out and bites you.
I guess going forward, we'll do the staffing analysis, and then also begin finishing out the RFQ. I did put some of the information in there. It seemed like the biggest things were, are you going to move everything to the new facility versus maintaining two facilities? I think that's really the biggest area that was left in question as far as putting out the RFQ. The rest of it is information was already in the needs assessment, is just put in the RFQ, getting some dates and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the information is already there. It's just mainly, are we going to go forward with doing one facility to put everything in it, or are we going to try to maintain two facilities? And then there were some suggestions in there about services that could be going along with doing either of those scenarios. So,
Mr. Mayor, I can add to that a little bit. One of the things, and maybe I can assist you all in making your decision on this. We never discourage the utilization of an old building if it could be utilized, right? However, Jim pointed out some things in his study, and we did in the physical plan assessment, that it has pretty much outlived its purpose, and it is still sitting in a floodplain. Jim brought up the staffing. It will be much more labor intensive related to moving those services, whether it be laundry services, food services, and medical services, having to be at 2 different sites. Along with, well, really just along with the fact that it is a building that is old, and it was based on old standards. Once you change the intent, purpose, and start to look at the building in a different way and provide some renovations, that means you have to come up to modern day standards. And once we get in there with a tape measure, that 42, is it 42, am I correct? 44 is gonna look a lot like 30, based on current modern standards. They've gone up and down, but we are in line with national standards related to square footage is required. So I would say that adding it to your new operation will save you costs related to maintaining both buildings, to staffing required to go back and forth between the two, and the potential of losing beds from an old facility that may end up having to be abandoned in the future anyway. So I think considering adding a section for work release specific would be a great option on the front end, because bed space doesn't get cheaper. It just gets more and more expensive as we move along. So I think that really needs to be considered. And we're encouraging a lot of facilities to do the same thing if they're planning a new facility or planning an addition, to include that type of space so there's not a dual operation.
Yeah, and that's what the sheriff and I discussed it as well, that if you're gonna keep that facility, the renovation cost is probably gonna be much more, and then just putting it on the new facility. I do appreciate what you're saying about the standards, and I think that's something that we all need to keep in mind, and the commission needs to keep in mind, that whatever we do on that, if we do keep that facility, whatever we do, you're gonna have to meet those standards, and I think that's gonna be difficult with the physical plant that we've got there in existence. My personal thought, as I said earlier, is just build it all into the new facility, and then that way you've got all your standards in place. You're not having your staff in 2 different locations. You're not splitting up those kind of things. And I personally think it's better having all under one roof than separated.
Well, in one specific instance, where they renovated the old facility that was really being used as storage and a training building, they opened it up as work release instead of having to put an addition onto the jail. But it's right next door, and you can cart things over. It's a criminal justice center where the courts are on site, so they had a lot of pluses and advantages to renovating that old building. Feedback. So, but I don't think that's the case here.
If the county is considering adding courtrooms to the facility, I think that would be a really good thing. A couple things I want to bring to the attention that may or may not know. I'm sure Judge Linville can talk about this as well, but there are several days whenever we have to try to finish one court docket quickly so another judge can get on the bench to do the same thing. If we have any sort of special judge, the courtrooms very quickly get double booked and triple booked sometimes. And as far as the layout of that room, there are also additional facilities and really more or less space that needs to be thought about as well. Space for the prosecutors to meet with victims, for witnesses. There's also for defense attorneys to meet with their clients who are not in custody. So a couple of areas outside, and then also to consult with the public defender, Ms. Gardner and myself, about the layout of the courtroom. We've been in courtrooms where they're absolutely not conducive to trying a case. If you put an exhibit up on the, for instance, on the electronic equipment, either the judge can't see it, the witness can't see it, or the jury can't see it. And then the prosecutors, where the inmate comes into the courtroom and whose table are they passing or what jury box are they passing to get to there's the security concerns that are there, especially if you've got I've tried cases with some pretty hotly contested cases and some pretty dangerous defendants who had to walk right by the prosecutor's table, as a matter of fact, to get to the defense counsel table. So we would certainly appreciate having input into the layout of the courtroom and to the auxiliary spaces around the courtroom, and that would definitely aid the county in having additional courtroom space. I just wanted to share that with you all.
If I may say something, you are right on spot. This is this is your project. Whatever you decide, jail, sheriff's offices, courtrooms, this is yours. And no matter what we say, because we will be there with you, we will give you some ideas, we'll give you some suggestions, we'll give you what's worked, what hasn't worked, some of the examples that you just gave, sir, that we have seen where the inmates walk right next to the judge, walk out into the courtroom. It doesn't make sense, but sometimes, sometimes architectural firms have your best interest at heart, but they don't understand your needs. And it's your project. And so embrace it and ensure that it meets your needs, and all the stakeholders that are involved that are going to be utilizing that building is critical to do it. And we try, as we go down that road with you, we try to ensure that each of those interests are brought to the table, and that you're at the table as part of those discussions, part of that design. So,
I do agree, because if we had a separate room, and I'm not sure how they're transported, but we have what we call a prison day, and then where they come from, the prison here in Trousdale County. And security reasons, I know that we're gonna need, you know, however many they bring that day. And I think you said earlier, you had seen them where they were sitting out in vans waiting to come in. I don't think that's very safe for our officers or for the public or anything. So if there was some way that, you know, that could be dealt with easier, I think that would be a good thing as well.
And with that situation, we will absolutely assist in helping the stakeholders understand, since you're bringing large amounts of people from the prison, that there may be incompatibles together there as well. So maybe not just the use of 1 or 2 rooms, but maybe multiple holding cells that you can split those individuals up in a secure area to have easy access. So you're not piling all into a same room. So we'll help you with that. Jail holding or the court holding is not within our purview, but we do try to assist with that to at least help understand the classification, holding and security part of that.
I'd just like to say, as we go forward on this, whoever firm we retain to do the engineering, I want everybody to have your input into the facility, because I think if we're going to design a new facility, we need to make sure it meets all the needs going forward. And I've also spoken to the circuit court clerk, Ms. Taylor, and she wanted to be included in the process. Well, and I assured her any discussions going forward, she's going to be involved in that for the design facilities and what her office needs going forward. So yeah, I want everybody to be able to have your input, because I've seen some of the things you just talked about in other courts and everything. It's been an issue in several places, and I know one time I was up in Macon County, they had 2 defendants who didn't get along, and they had to hurry out the female inmate so they could empty out that inmate, that holding cell, and then put those individuals in separate holding cells. So it has been an issue. And again, the same thing about being able to speak to your client without everybody in the world being able to hear it, or you've been able to talk to the victims without somebody down the hall, might be Joe Bob's cousin, telling the defense what you've been talking to the victim. Or so yeah, those, like I said, all those concerns I want to be addressed, and everybody will be included in that discussion. Make sure that we have a time scheduled in the future. The engineer will come to this committee and everybody can have their input, and that's all included going forward. And you get review of the plans as it goes through the stages. You get to look at the plans, put your input in there, and make sure everybody is heard, because I just want to make sure this is as open and cooperative as possible.
One problem that is indicative to a planning stage is very few people can look at a set of paper plans with lines on them and translate that into their mind as to how big a space, how small a space, how these spaces relate to each other. It's just a bunch of lines on paper. So they look at it, you give it to them, you give them a blueprint, they look at it and they say, well, oh yeah, that looks great, because they don't want to admit, I ain't got a clue what I'm looking at. And I think we ran into that on this facility over here quite often when we would ask for input, and people would say, well, yeah, it looks okay to me. And then later on, when they really had time to think about it, we're looking at, well, I think this needs to be different, when we'd already went down the road of this way. So don't lose sight of that it's hard for some people to make that mental, I hate to say mental leap, but it is a mental leap. Some people are not spatial. You know, I can look at a set of blueprints and walk through the building in my mind. Not everybody can do that. And I think we need to make sure that whoever's giving input their first reaction is not their final reaction. Give them time to digest it, I guess.
And I certainly agree with that. You know, one of the things that you don't always think about is just the size of counsel table. But if you have an defendant who has 2 lawyers and you've got 3 people sitting at a table and just thinking about how 3 or 4 of us are sitting together, you can't have a desk this size for 3 people. And on the same side, on the state side, we will have generally 2 prosecutors and an officer there in a major trial. And so that exactly what he was talking about, the spatial concepts of things, and think about how many people are going to be able to sit in this space and use this space and still have a space to put, you know, on some of the larger cases that I've tried here, I've had bankers' boxes, and I would have to have basically a bench behind the counsel table where I could set my exhibits and my cross-examinations and all the things that I've prepared in bankers' boxes because the space at the table. So just those type of additional considerations that are really helpful to a lawyer, and I'm just representing that aspect of it, but I certainly agree with what he's talking about, the spatial size.
Any further questions or comments, or?
Would I be correct in assuming that the courtrooms over here would still be like for chancery court, certain civil?
Yes, sir.
Have to have extra courtrooms in the new facility.
Yes, sir. That kind of my thought on that is kind of do like Wilson County did, where you've got all the criminal justice in one place and then you got your civil somewhere else. That's what I looked at, maintaining this as the civil court facility and then creating a new criminal justice complex out there. That way we've got all the security issues.
You could have juvenile there, couldn't you?
Yeah, you can have juvenile, especially most of our cases on the juvenile side.
Because there's 2 good sized courtrooms there. We use conference rooms sometimes in the very sure. There has been times when we could having a criminal in the new justice system. This would solve a lot of problems because Chancellor Smith and sometimes those birds, which we were all.
Yeah,
That's exactly our thought process.
yeah, we had discussed and we thought if you put them in 2 separate facilities, again, following what Wilson County did, you're going to eliminate a lot of the problems we're having with scheduling right now.
Yeah, that way the sheriff's department only has to have officers there, we can put it for.
Safer. Thank you.
Yeah, the trouble we're having right now with MA holding that, CCA day or whatever it is.
Yes.
We don't want to mix them with our prisoners.
Right.
We got 4 home cells, and we got to have females, and you got to separate the other counties. We don't want to put them in there. We don't want contraband, prison bringing contraband, and a lot of times we're bringing prisoners that, from the prison system that's committed crimes out here, and they've been there for life, and they'll say everything. We've all heard in the courtroom how they act. They've broken stuff inside our facility. And what are you going to do with somebody who's doing a life sentence without hospital jail? They don't care. So that's one reason we keep them in the van, bring them in 1 or 2 at a time, for safety, security concerns. Us. And, right now, we've got one that we're going to have to get probably tomorrow, hopefully we won't. We did a crime out here, aggravated murder. Time to expire on his original sentence. So now they won't let us get him because we don't really have a facility here. Lock him down. Other criminals. I mean, DA here is working on together.
Filed the safekeeping order with the Department of Safety about an hour ago.
Okay. So hopefully we won't have to bring him here. The crime was committed in the prison, not here in the county.
There was one recommendation here I want to follow up on to get a little bit more input. The Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, my thought is the majority of the people that needs to be included is already on this committee itself, so I can see this functioning as the exact same thing. I do have a question. Is there a need to include, let's say if we have people that are providing mental health services or substance abuse services, would they need to be included on this committee as well, or is it just pretty much the main stakeholders here?
So I've seen a very the one that we had in Hamilton County that I was on, we had a couple citizens, we had a couple commissioners, we had a criminal court judge, sessions court judge, obviously the public defender, and district attorney, county mayor, the sheriff. We had, we don't have the chief of police. We had a couple different municipality chiefs of police on it. Certainly as the jail administrator, I was on it. It varies by the community, those people that you think, or those entities that you think would provide some good, valid input or are affected by what's going on. So a mental health representative, if you had a substance abuse entity here locally, particularly with what we pointed to in the data here that shows the numbers of persons coming through your facility, the number of arrests as it relates to substance abuse, drugs. But having those kind of persons at the table too might offer some suggestions or ideas on how to enhance your system or keep it running. So,
As we were, the county mayors and everything were being consulted on the current opioid litigation, one of the things we were really stressed is look at abatement. I look back at our numbers from Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services versus what we got in our criminal cases. It seems like more of our substance abuse is being captured on the criminal side versus out in the community, because we really statistically have very little numbers as far as inpatient, outpatient, and those things. So I think that as far as abatement, I think would be better use of funds putting it towards substance abuse services, mental health counseling in the criminal justice side versus trying to do something out in the community at large. And then you could also try to work something with them. We discussed maybe partnering with Smith and Macon counties or other surrounding counties so that we have a larger pool of people needing services and funds there to fund that, and just have them go around the different communities on certain days and provide those services to the community at large. So that's what I was going to look at, is using those opioid funds to do that for the criminal justice side. And I think bringing those people to the table so we can make sure they're included, at least on that criminal justice committee going forward, that'd help us really create a real holistic approach to what we're doing here in Trousdale County.
We're obviously seeing a push for that within criminal justice throughout the system, throughout the country, and particularly here in the state. I think we're finally aware of the need for that within our justice system in a way that we haven't seen focused on in years past. So I think we'd just be in step with what's coming if we do that.
I'd like to chime in on that as well. We performed a survey here recently about drugs and what that's contributing to your facility. And surprisingly enough, drugs only is a significantly small number of people who are being held in custody. There's a big misnomer about that, well, half of the people in jail are because of drugs alone, and that's definitely not the case. Now, it's a co-occurring problem, not to jump on the co-occurring disorder, but it is usually a co-occurring or a driver of that or something along those lines. However, it was strikingly low of how many are on who are either being held pre-trial or who are sentenced on drug charges alone. It is really low. It is surprisingly low. The numbers came back way lower than I anticipated. I expected it to at least be 10% of the population. It's much lower.
Yeah, I agree. Usually if it's just a drug charge, the district attorney's office everywhere is pretty good to work with. It's not something, and then the sheriff's department, as far as they got limited jail space, if it's just a nonviolent drug offender, they work with you to try to get them released. Again, what I saw in most of my cases was co-occurring. They were on drugs, doing meth or something like that, and that's why they stole, or that's why they got in a fight or something like that. So if you address the substance abuse, and some of them have undiagnosed mental health issues going along with that, and that's why they were self-medicating. So I think if you address some of those issues, along with these other programs we're going to put in place, I think we'll have a real good chance of reducing our recidivism rate going forward, and it'll help save cost and put back people that are going to be productive members of society, not on the revolving treadmill.
Mr. Mayor, if you're going to do some additions to the committee, I would recommend that you add more county commissioners that are willing to work on the committee. How many have you got now? 3?
As far as county commissioners, I just got one.
One. Yeah, I would recommend that you would increase that number, find folks willing to do that.
I was just gonna say that where your drug population shows up is in probation violations, because, and it's not always just failed drug tests. It's people that taken all of their money that they could be using for fines or could be using to pay restitution to victim. All of that money is being diverted into their drug problem, and you see them show up on violation of probation. So if you just looked at just the pure numbers of the people here in jail just on a drug offense, many of them have been given an opportunity to go to a rehab facility to do something on the front end as part of probation in an effort to try to keep them out and to address the problem that they have. Where they fail is when they come back, and that's why our violation of probation numbers are so high. A lot of that underlying is at least related to a drug issue that they have.
Is there any other questions or issues? Like I said, we'll go forward, we'll look at the staffing analysis, and then continue to work on our RFQ, try to get that out there. And then we'll put together a scoring committee for the engineering services, and then obviously as we come back and they ask what kind of facility we're looking at, we'll bring them in front of the committee so they can get everybody's input, and we'll start that process moving forward. And then I'll look at some of these things we discussed, adding commissioners to this, and I would like pretty much this to just be our CCP/criminal justice coordinating committee as we go forward. And then, because I would like this to continue, even when the facility's built. I think we're having a good discussion. I think it'll help going forward. So, like I said, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank Mr. Hart for his work on the needs assessment and everything he did, and for coming here today and taking the time to be here, and as well as everyone here. I appreciate your input and your attendance today, and I just want to say thank you very much, and hope you have a good rest of your day. And obviously, if you need anything, don't hesitate to call me or email me, and I'll be able to answer any questions I can, or if you need further information, I'll get any information I can for you. Thank you.
No,